Hey, I've gathered some of the most catastrophic and preventable shark fatalities ever documented. From a Pacific fishing trip where one afternoon of compounding decisions put 7 people on a course they never returned from, to a South African beach where warning signs were already posted before a writer entered the water alone in the dark. But first, the story of a family in $8 million yacht. It was July 12th, 2022, and the Pacific Ocean, roughly 70 miles off the Southern California coast, offered the kind of day that offshore fishermen plan months to find. The water was deep and blue-black in the way open ocean gets, when the bottom is no longer a consideration too far down to matter, too far down to see. Caleb Dawson was 52 years old. He had spent his adult life building a commercial construction company in Southern California, the kind of business that expands slowly, then all at once, producing, after decades of work, the particular kind of financial position that allows a person to partially sell it. The 82-foot luxury yacht he had purchased, valued at approximately $8 million, was not an impulsive decision. It was the physical representation of what he had spent a career earning. He had decades of recreational boating experience. His family, his wife Laura, his brother Daniel, and his children Ethan, Olivia, Ryan, and Grace made this trip every year, targeting bluefin tuna offshore. This was not their first time out here. It was their last. The fishing that afternoon had been exceptional by any measure. Multiple large tuna landed, the kind of day that produces photographs and plans to return. The cleaning process began at the swim platform, the low, wide deck at the stern that sits close to the waterline, designed for exactly this kind of work. Several tuna were cleaned there while the boat drifted, and 2 of the larger fish were secured to the hull by rope. The logic was straightforward. Freezer space was limited, the fish were large, and the ropes kept them accessible while the family decided what to do next. What the ropes also did was suspend 2 bodies of bleeding tuna directly against the hull, open wounds leaking blood and biological fluid into the water beneath the boat for more than an hour. I've seen people make this kind of call before. Keep the fish close, deal with storage later. At a marina on a slow afternoon, it's inconvenient. Offshore, in open ocean, it's a different calculation entirely. Or it should be. Great white sharks are among the most capable apex predators in any marine environment. Adults regularly exceed 15 feet in length and can weigh upward of 4,000 pounds, though most individuals encountered in offshore Pacific waters fall within a range of 11 to 14 feet. They detect blood and biological fluids in concentrations measured in parts per million, across distances that can extend more than a mile under favorable current conditions. They are not random in their approach. They follow scent trails with purpose, investigating the source. When that source involves struggling or suspended prey at the surface, what follows is not investigatory hesitation. It is what they were built for. A large great white followed the scent trail to the yacht. It located the suspended tuna and began striking at them, repeated violent passes directed at the fish, not the boat. The ropes frayed and then gave way entirely, dropping the carcasses and drawing the shark into a full feeding thrash directly against the swim platform. The impacts were forceful enough to rock the stern and send equipment sliding across the deck. Daniel, standing closest to the platform trying to haul the last rope in, lost his footing in the chaos and went into the water. What happened in the next minute and a half is the part investigators later focused on. Caleb went in after his brother without a life vest. The shark was still working the area close to the hull, still agitated from the feeding sequence, and Daniel took the first strike before Caleb reached him. The bite was recorded by investigators as a single, massive closing bite to the torso, the kind of wound a great white produces when it commits fully rather than investigates. There is no controlled pressure in an attack like that. The jaw force of a mature great white exceeds 4,000 pounds per square inch, and the serrated teeth don't cut so much as they displace tissue, bone, and everything attached to it. Daniel did not survive the initial contact. Caleb reached him anyway, which put him in the same water, beside the same animal, with no flotation and no way back to the boat on his own. Laura threw a cushion and screamed for the older kids to get the inflatable tender off its davit. In the panic of launching it, the tender capsized at the rail, spilling 2 more people into water that already carried blood from both the tuna and, by then, from Daniel. The struggling of multiple bodies at the surface produces the exact low-frequency vibration and movement pattern that draws large sharks to a location from considerable distance. More sharks arrived over the following hour, drawn by a scene that kept generating the same signal that had brought the first one in. By the time the remaining family members managed to get back aboard the yacht, which lost its power and took on a bit of damage in some parts after being rocked by the animal full darkness had fallen, overnight temperatures on open Pacific water are survivable for a healthy adult only, for a limited window. And not everyone who went in the water made it back to the boat before dark. The Coast Guard was radioed at the first sign of trouble. but a rescue helicopter dispatched from the coast still faced a significant flight time to reach a vessel that far out, and search and rescue operations in open ocean at night are slow by necessity. By the time surface vessels and aircraft reached the Dawson yacht, some family members had been recovered from the water and some had not. The chain of events, reconstructed afterward, traced back not to a single catastrophic decision but to a series of reasonable-seeming ones: fish here, secure them there, deal with storage later, that compounded into something that could not be reversed once the first person went into the water. What's genuinely difficult to sit with is that every step of that afternoon probably felt like a normal day, until it didn't. A situation that was already in motion before most of the family understood it had started. What comes next is a different kind of story. Smaller in scale, one person, one decision, but built on the same foundational logic. A man who understood the risk clearly enough to have been told it directly and entered the water regardless. It was October 18th, 2019, and the tidal inlet along Florida's Atlantic coast was moving with the kind of current that pushes everything through a narrow channel: warm, salt-heavy water and whatever the season had deposited at the edge of the estuary. By the time the charter had finished its catch, the water around the boat carried the color and smell of several large tarpon being cleaned at the gunnel, and the tide was taking all of it outward through the channel. Cole Pierce was 34 years old and had built his career producing underwater footage for fishing charters along the Florida coast. He was comfortable in the water, in the way that years of repetition produce, familiar with the conditions, habituated to the discomfort, confident in his ability to read a situation. His reputation was built partly on that willingness. He entered the water after clients landed large fish, capturing angles that mounted equipment could not provide. The footage was dramatic. The risk was understood as part of the work. The captain had issued a warning before Cole entered. The inlet was already documented for significant bull shark activity during this season, and the tarpon cleaning had introduced blood and organic debris into a channel the sharks were actively using. The warning was specific enough to constitute a complete picture of what the water around the boat contained at that moment. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous species in shallow, coastal, and estuarine environments, not because of their size relative to other large sharks, but because of where they operate. Most species associated with serious shark incidents prefer deeper offshore water. Bull sharks do not. They patrol tidal inlets, river mouths, and shallow bays, the same water that divers and swimmers occupy. Adults typically reach 7 to 8 feet and weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. Their sensory response to blood and moving water is rapid, and in a tidal channel already carrying organic material, the time between a scent stimulus and a physical approach can be measured in minutes. They do not typically offer the visible surface behavior that some species display before a strike. The attack, when it comes, is usually from behind, fast, and committed. Cole had his camera focused on sharks already approaching the fish remains when the strike came. He didn't see it. That is how bull sharks operate in low visibility tidal water. There is no approach visible from the front, no shadow passing across your field of view before contact. A large bull shark hit him from behind with enough force to drive him forward in the water column. The bite landed at the upper leg and hit the zone a bull shark targets when it commits, closing on the largest available mass with a grip that does not release immediately. Bull sharks bite and hold, rotating slightly, which produces a tearing wound pattern rather than a single clean puncture. The femoral artery runs through exactly that region, and when it is compromised, the blood loss that follows is not something that allows for a long window. The crew pulled him from the water immediately and radioed for a Coast Guard rendezvous while running toward open water to meet the response. A medevac helicopter was dispatched, but the injuries were unsurvivable before it arrived. Honestly, when someone who knows what is in the water still gets in, that's the part I find genuinely hard to explain. It's not ignorance. It's the decision that the footage is worth more than what the captain had already told you directly, out loud, before you stepped over the side. The inlet continued to hold bull sharks in the hours after the incident. The same animals, the same water, the same behavior functioning with complete biological consistency before and after a person entered their environment without the positioning or distance to survive the encounter. Wildlife officers confirmed the ongoing activity. Footage captured from his camera were sealed away in respect of his family's request. Cole Pierce had been warned and made a choice with that information in hand. What follows is the story of a woman who had far less warning available to her, where the risk arrived before she did, and the signals that might have saved her were visible only to people who knew what they were looking at. It was February 21st, 2016, and the offshore reef, several miles from the Hawaiian coastline, was carrying the particular water clarity that the Pacific produces in mid-morning, before wind and surface disturbance reduce visibility. The reef the excursion group was visiting required a boat to reach not a beach access location, but an offshore destination, far enough from shore that the surrounding water column was deep and unbroken in every direction. The light was good, the conditions were inviting. Underwater, the situation was already different. Candace Whitmore was 41 years old and operated a travel agency specializing in high-end tropical destinations, regularly documenting locations for future clients. She photographed destinations as a professional function, which gave her license to spend more time in the water than most guests on outings like this one. The camera was a reason to stay. It was also the thing that held her attention at the wrong moment. The reef had seen several consecutive days of heavy fishing activity in the lead-up to that morning, with commercial boats cleaning their catch at anchor and discarding remains nearby. That accumulated activity, not any single event, had already established a standing scent field across the reef by the time the excursion boat arrived. Open ocean currents carry that material in directions and at distances invisible from the surface. A person snorkeling above a reef miles offshore has no way to see the scent trail that had been building for days, or to know what kind of animal had been drawn toward it from depth over that time. Tiger sharks are among the largest predatory sharks in any ocean environment, regularly reaching 10 to 14 feet and exceeding 1,000 pounds at full maturity. They are generalist hunters with a broad prey selection and a persistent investigatory approach when close to a surface target, unlike some species that circle at distance or retreat when a target does not match expectation. Tiger sharks tend to follow through on an investigatory approach. They commonly close from deeper water and below, using the contrast of the surface against the dark column beneath to identify targets before surfacing. The first indication of their presence is often the animal itself, already within striking range, already committed. The guides on the boat had observed behavioral signals: reef fish scattering abruptly, sea turtles departing the area that experienced offshore operators recognized as indicators of a large predator in the vicinity. Most of the group returned to the boat. Candace remained in the water to continue photographing. The tiger shark closed from the deeper water below the reef in the way the species typically does, not a rush from distance, but a slow, deliberate ascent that covers the last several feet quickly enough that there is no meaningful gap between visible and contact. It struck from below, which meant Candace's first awareness of the animal was the impact itself. The bite took the upper torso and shoulder. A tiger shark at full commitment does not sample and release the way some species do in uncertain contact. It bites, it drives, and the wound profile reflects that. The crew recovered her within minutes. The injuries were fatal before medical evacuation could reach her. I keep coming back to the reef fish scattering. That detail is in the reconstruction for a reason, because it is a signal that people with experience in this environment know how to read. The guides read it. The question is always whether the person still in the water has been given the information, and then whether they act on it. The aftermath of the incident reinforced protocols around snorkeling in proximity to areas of recent fishing activity. The tiger shark had followed a scent trail built up over days to a location, found movement and warmth at the surface, and acted in the manner consistent with its biology. Nothing about its behavior was anomalous. Everything that shaped the outcome had been set into motion well before the excursion boat arrived that morning. Candace Whitmore's situation was built by conditions she had no hand in creating and signals she did not see in time. What comes next is the story of a man who saw no signals at all, only a mechanical problem he believed he could solve quickly in a body of water he should have never entered. It was June 3rd, 2018, and roughly 60 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. Well beyond the continental shelf, the water had the deep, unbroken quality of ocean floor that no longer registers as a feature. No reef, no landmark, no visible bottom. Just the disabled boat rocking in a light swell, an oil platform in the middle distance, and the tow line that had drifted beneath the hull while the group waited for assistance that was already on its way. Jason Morales was 38 years old and worked as an offshore electrical engineer, servicing oil platforms throughout the Gulf. He understood marine environments as a professional. The work took him to exposed offshore locations routinely, and he navigated them with the confidence that years of familiarity produce. The recreational fishing trip he was on with co-workers was not a professional context. The decision he made in the next few minutes was not a professional one either. The propeller had fouled on floating rope, a common enough mechanical issue in offshore water where debris moves unpredictably. Assistance had been contacted. The group was waiting. A tow line then drifted under the hull, and Jason made an assessment. Flotation vest secured, dive knife in hand, a problem he could see and believed he could resolve before the tow arrived. He entered the water. Oceanic white-tip sharks are found almost exclusively in deep, open ocean environments, exactly the water Jason had entered. They are strongly and documentably associated with disabled vessels, floating objects, and anything unusual at the surface of the open ocean. This association is not incidental. It is a foraging strategy shaped by an environment where food sources are irregular, and anything anomalous at the surface historically represented opportunity. They approach persistently rather than circling at distance, and when a warm-bodied animal enters the water beside a disabled vessel in open ocean, the approach proceeds. Adults typically range from 6 to 10 feet in length, and their behavior at close range is deliberate and sustained in ways that other species are not. Jason was working beneath the hull when the shark made contact. Oceanic whitetips don't announce themselves, they close gradually, persistently, and the strike when it comes is not a single explosive event the way a great white's is. It is a bite that holds, that the animal stays with, working the wound while the target responds. The initial bite landed on Jason's lower arm, likely the first thing the shark encountered as he worked beneath the hull with his hands. The crew above pulled on him immediately, but an oceanic whitetip mid-bite requires force to disengage, and the secondary wound to his side occurred during the extraction. His co-workers pulled him back aboard within minutes. The injuries were unsurvivable before rescue aircraft reached the scene. I'll say this plainly. Getting into deep ocean water beside a disabled boat to clear a tow line with help already in transit is the definition of a solvable problem that became an unsurvivable one. The line would have waited. The shark had already been waiting for something to enter the water. It was already working. The guidance that came out of the incident was exactly what it should have been. Remain aboard a disabled vessel in open ocean water. The oceanic whitetip had behaved in exact accordance with its documented pattern. The fatal variable was the decision to enter a body of water that, 60 miles offshore beside a non-functioning boat, carried a specific and well-established risk that did not require interpretation. Jason Morales entered the water to solve a problem he could see from the gunnel. Jason McConnell entered the water for footage, and the shark beneath him had been part of that coastline long before he ever arrived. It was August 30th, 2014. And the southern coastline of Australia was running under clear sky conditions that made aerial and in-water footage worth the setup time good light. A manageable surf and the long coastal perspective that gives drone shots their value. Jason McConnell was 29 years old and worked as a commercial drone and action camera operator, producing tourism content along the coast. The work frequently placed him at remote stretches of beach, often working alone, and producing the footage his clients hired him for required him to put himself in frame. This stretch of coastline was not a neutral backdrop. It sat near a seasonal seal colony and along a run used by migrating salmon, and local operators had logged shark sightings in the area throughout the preceding weeks. That morning, recreational anglers working from coastal rocks nearby had also been cleaning large fish at the water's edge, adding fresh scent to water that was already, independently, part of an active shark's regular patrol route. The fish cleaning didn't summon a shark into unfamiliar water, it sharpened the attention of one that was already there. Great white sharks patrolling southern Australian coastlines move through these waters in response to prey concentration seals, migrating fish, and the scent trails that cleaning activity adds on top of an already established food source. Adults in southern Australian waters frequently exceed 15 feet in length, and their hunting method along these coastlines is well documented. Approach from below and behind, using the shark's position in darker, deeper water to close the distance before surfacing into the strike. There is no circling phase, no prolonged surface behavior at the distances involved. The strike arrives before the animal becomes visible, and at the mass of a mature great white, the impact is not comparable to a bite. It is a collision. Jason had swum beyond the breakers to provide perspective for the drone recording overhead. The shark came from directly below that, is what the physical evidence and the reconstruction both indicated. A mature great white running a vertical attack from depth does not telegraph the approach. The first thing Jason would have registered was the force, not the animal. The strike took the lower body and leg with the kind of structural damage that a shark of that size and velocity produces on contact not just tissue but bone, the impact equivalent to being hit by something moving at speed rather than something biting. At the mass of a mature great white driving upward from below, the momentum carries both animal and target partially out of the water. What witnesses described from shore as a violent breach was that sequence the shark surfacing through its own strike. Jason already gone from the water's surface by the time they understood what they had seen. Lifeguards and nearby surfers responded immediately. Jason had already gone under before anyone reached the position. The response was fast. It was not fast enough. The footage he was attempting to capture was legitimate work, the kind of shot his clients needed and that required him to be in the water to get. I'm not dismissing that. What I can't move past is that he swam into water that he had every reason independent of that morning to already hold a large predator. And the added scent from the angler's catch only made that predator more attentive at the exact moment he entered. Coastal advisories following the incident emphasized both the proximity to the seal colony and the practice of cleaning fish near surf zones during peak season. The great white had followed an environment it had already claimed as part of its range. Jason's presence in it at that moment was the only new variable. Jason McConnell swam into a shark's established range without knowing it. Kevin Holloway had spent over 2 decades in the charter fishing industry. He knew exactly what the animal beside his boat was capable of. That's what makes the next decision genuinely difficult to account for. It was November 9th, 2021, and the offshore waters of New Zealand's coastline were being worked by tournament boats running the kind of gear that serious pelagic fishing demands: heavy tackle, large capacity reels, rods designed to handle fish that do not come to the surface willingly. Kevin Holloway was 45 years old and had owned a sport fishing charter company for more than 2 decades. This was not recreational participation for him. The ocean was his industry, the fish were his inventory, and the equipment trailing behind the boat was expensive in proportion to what the work required. The short-fin mako had been hooked, had fought the line until it broke near the surface, and was still attached to the tackle, the line trailing behind it as the fish remained close to the stern. Kevin was leaning over the gunwale, reaching for the gear. Short-fin mako sharks hold a specific position in the biology of open-water predators that photographs at rest or at the surface do not fully communicate. They are the fastest sharks in the ocean, capable of burst speeds exceeding 40 miles per hour in short intervals, and among the most athletically explosive large fish in any marine environment. They are capable of repeated vertical leaps that can carry them 20 feet or more above the surface, a behavior that does not diminish during the leap sequence and does not require the shark to be fresh. A hooked mako still attached to a line, having fought the tackle for an extended period, is not a fish that is slowing down. It is an animal in an active, sustained stress response that makes its behavior at close range unpredictable in direction, but not in intensity. The shark erupted from the water in one of its characteristic vertical leaps as Kevin leaned over the gunwale. A mako leaving the surface at that velocity does not arc cleanly. It is not a controlled breach. The body is torquing, the tail is driving, and whatever the animal contacts on the way up or the way back down is contacted at the full energy of that sequence. The impact caught Kevin at the chest and shoulder with enough force to knock him clean over the rail. He was in the water beside a shark that was still attached to the boat by trailing line, still in the stress response that had produced the leap, and unable to get clear of the animal without also moving through the tangle of gear between them. The wounds he sustained in the water to the arms and torso were consistent with a mako that was not attacking so much as continuing to thrash through whatever it was in contact, which at that moment was a person. Crew members threw flotation devices as they worked to get him back aboard. Kevin was recovered within minutes. He died from his injuries before the boat reached shore. 2 decades in the charter industry, that is enough time to have seen what a hooked mako does at the side of a boat, likely more than once. I don't say that to be uncharitable. I say it because the gap between what someone knows and what they do in a moment like this is something that years of experience in this industry genuinely does not explain. The gear was valuable. The reach over the side made sense in a way that could not account for what was still happening 4 feet below the surface. Maritime investigators focused on the act of manually attempting to retrieve tackle from a large, active shark as the central risk factor in the sequence. The short-fin mako had not stopped being a short-fin mako because it was near the boat. The leap that put Kevin in the water was behavior within the animal's fully documented range, triggered by conditions a hooked, agitated mako at close range to the vessel that Kevin had likely encountered in some form across his career. Every prior encounter that did not end this way had reinforced the assumption that the system was stable until the moment it wasn't. Kevin Holloway made a decision in the middle of a situation already in motion. Ella Collins made her decision before the situation even existed, alone, before sunrise, with signs already posted at the access point that describe exactly what the water she was about to enter contained. It was May 15th, 2017, and the South African coastline bordering the active seal colony was moving through the pre-dawn hour in near total darkness. The sky was lightening at its eastern edge, but the water still held the flat, undifferentiated blackness of ocean in the hour before sunrise. The warning signs posted at the beach access were visible in the beam of a flashlight. Ella Collins had seen them. She entered the water anyway. Ella was 36 years old and worked as a freelance wildlife writer, documenting remote coastal locations for publications that valued access that required showing up before everyone else. She had arrived before sunrise, specifically for the light, the narrow window of diffuse, directional illumination that arrives before the sun clears the horizon, producing a quality of photograph that cannot be replicated at any other time of day. It was a legitimate professional objective. The execution of it required her to be in water she had already been warned against entering. Great white sharks are documented to concentrate heavily in seal colony waters during the pre-dawn and early morning hours, with peak activity in the period between full darkness and roughly 2 hours after sunrise. Low light conditions during these hours reduce the shark's visibility from above, while their hunting approach from below remains fully effective. Seal activity increases at dawn as animals enter and exit the water, concentrating prey in a small geographic area. The result is that the coastline bordering an active seal colony in the early morning hours during peak season represents one of the most statistically documented environments for for great white activity anywhere on a coastal stretch. The seasonal warning signs posted at this beach existed because local marine authorities had documented precisely this pattern, at precisely this time of year, at this specific location. Ella entered the water alone before any other personnel were on duty at the beach. She was several hundred yards offshore when witnesses onshore described what they saw: a violent surface breach, white water, and then a dorsal fin briefly visible before the water went still. That sequence is consistent with how a great white hunting in low-light seal colony water makes contact with a surface target. The approach comes from below and behind, the shark fully committed before breaking the surface. The breach itself, a product of the momentum generated during the attack. There is no warning in that sequence. There is no moment where a person in the water sees something approaching and has time to respond. What the witnesses saw from shore was the end of the contact, the water going still after the breach, not the approach that preceded it. Ella did not resurface. An extensive search recovered her floating camera housing and a single swim fin. Ella herself was never found. Investigators, working from the witness accounts, the recovered equipment, and the absence of any other plausible explanation given the location and hour, classified the case as a probable fatal shark attack, the most consistent conclusion available, if not one that could be confirmed with physical recovery. I'll be direct about this one. The warning signs, the hour, the location beside an active seal colony, the absence of anyone else in the water, the season, every element that morning pointed in the same direction. The decision to enter anyway is not one I can reconstruct as a miscalculation made under uncertainty. It reads, as a choice made with the relevant information already in hand. The expanded warning signage that followed her death applied to the full peak season period, a measure designed to make the information more visible to future visitors. The great white operating in that environment had been following documented patterns that had existed long enough to generate the signs she had walked past in the dark.